Welcome back to another episode of the Baird Retirement Management Show. Today, we have a very special episode. We're going to be getting to know one of the financial advisors on the team a little bit better.
Before we get to know me better, who are you?
So up until this point, I've been the mystery host on the Baird Retirement Management Show. But my name is Hannah Ashcroft. I'm the younger sister of Greg Ashcroft and a financial advisor in training with the Ashcroft Pesek Bartosh Group. Now, this podcast is about you, so we're going to get into some questions.
Let's do it.
As we all know, Greg is a chartered financial analyst. He is a certified financial planner. He is a senior vice president with the Ashcroft Pesek Bartosh Group, and he's worked in the financial services industry for 9 years. But on to the things that people don't know. The first question I have in our Q&A is, what do you enjoy doing in your free time?
What do I enjoy doing in my free time? Well, right now, and I've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, my wife and I have 7 children. The oldest will be 10 in December, and the youngest are a set of twins that are 3 months old. So generally, when people ask my wife and I what we do in our free time, we say, what is that? Most of our free time is spent parenting, which has its own ups and downs. It has its own thrills, and it has its own joys. But when we actually are away from our kids, that will generally come in some kind of structured date night, which sounds sterile, but we find that element of our relationship to be extremely important. So on our free time or my free time, I spend most of that either with Cam, my wife, or with my kids. And so if you can consider the time away from work as our free time, virtually all of it is spent with family.
That's true. I can attest. A lot of family time, a lot of kids.
Yeah.
7's a lot.
It is.
As it turns out. Okay, well, moving on. I guess this next question is similar to what you do in your free time, but if you had to recommend one book or movie, which book or movie would it be and why?
I think because I'm far more bookish than I am into movies, and because I love gifting books, I think my criteria for which my favorite book would be the one that I've recommended the most, or the two that I've recommended the most, or the two I can immediately solicit to mind, which the first one was or is a book written by Ben Sherwood called The Survivors Club. And this was a book that both my wife and I read and just immediately fell in love with. It's full of, and I think that this structure of book is really great. It's full of essentially a bunch of little vignettes or anecdotes about some catastrophic circumstances people might find themselves in, where Ben Sherwood, the author, closely examines who survives these circumstances, what traits do they share in common, and how we can structure our lives to become more like those people who survive. And I don't want to give much of the book away, but we gifted that to virtually everybody in our family or anybody who could read. The other book that I've thoroughly enjoyed, and a person that I thoroughly enjoy reading, is Rory Sutherland's book called Alchemy. And Rory Sutherland, he writes for The Spectator in the UK. He's done several TED Talks. He is either the keynote speaker, one of the founders of the Nudge Conference, which is all about behavioral economics, behavioral finance. He's very much steeped in that world. And his only book, well, he wrote a book some time ago called The Wiki Man, but I think he was actually a co-author. But his best book, or his seminal work right now, is called Alchemy. And again, that's the book that I've recommended to virtually everybody that I've come across, particularly those who are either interested in this field or in the marketing field, because he technically works for Ogilvy and Mather, but he's in the department of creative solutions, which is a department he created himself in order to more closely examine what drives behavioral change. Because he thinks that the obvious things are not so obvious, or what behaviors we post-rationalize have entirely different starting points than most people would think. And it will change your perspective on so many things. So those two books, The Survivors Club by Ben Sherwood and Alchemy by Rory Sutherland, would be my favorite books to recommend.
Your wife, my sister-in-law, did give me The Survivors Club for my 30th birthday.
And another thing about books, which I think is great, is the mark of a great book is how it changes the reader. And so if you take something from the book, or your criteria for reading a book, watching a TV show, or listening to a podcast, my conjecture is it should satisfy one of 3, if not best case scenario, all 3 criteria, which is the first of those criteria is just, is it entertaining? Are you actually enjoying it? So when I read books, I will start 5 or 6 books, and then the one that I latch onto is the one that I'm going to read, which a lot of people find to be strange, but I don't. I don't follow this. I don't get handcuffed to a book. And if a book starts to bore me, I will just stop reading it. The other part of what a book, a movie, a podcast, a show, what it should do is it going to change your behavior once you're done reading it? So is there anything that you can take and apply in your life the next morning or the next month or the next week that's going to move you in the direction that you want to go? And the final thing is, it's kind of a mix of the first two. Is it going to change the way that you think about things? And I would say that will typically manifest in a behavior down the road. But if a book, movie, podcast, magazine article, whatever, if it's not entertaining me, if it's not going to change the way that I think, or if it's not going to change the way that I behave, I don't read it. Ben Sherwood's book has changed the way that we approach problems. And the funny thing about that is a lot of us engage in these often illusory or perfunctory motions that we have to go through in life, one of which being a fire drill. But Ben Sherwood in his book makes a strong case for taking these kinds of emergency preparedness drills very seriously, because those people who survive catastrophic situations are generally the people who know what to do in an emergency. So it's kind of like the lame see something, say something saying, which has been pervasive, since acts of terror have become supposedly more common. But really, it's if your gut is telling you that you are in danger, listen closely, because it's there for a reason.
Oprah says a similar thing.
The great philosopher, Oprah Winfrey. Yeah.
Of our time, truly. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our next question. And I'm going to go ahead and jump to who's been the biggest influence in your life, personally or professionally?
This is a great question. And I think I have an odd answer to it, because I think that it is a revolving cast of characters rather than one person specifically. So I think, and we might get into this a little bit later, how I ended up working here is I think that there's an electromagnetism to the town that you grow up in, and maybe for sons to work with their fathers. So I think if you were looking back and you wanted to regress or find a correlation or a predictive variable as to where a young man might end up in life, you can take a look at or examine what his dad did, and you'd have a pretty good guess. You might be able to just extrapolate from there, and you wouldn't be right all the time, but you would be right some of the time. So personally and professionally, I think this is true for a lot of people, and we've been very lucky to have the parents that we had. Is our dad, my dad, he's had a profound influence on me personally and professionally, but he hasn't been the only one. So before I got married, he was probably the person I was trying to model my life after the most. And he was a person who spoke the most indirectly into my life. After getting married, I would say my spouse has had a profound impact on the direction that I was going to go in life. And then beyond that, when we got pregnant for the first time with our oldest son, that had a very life-changing force. Is when you're going to bring life into the world, it all of a sudden gives everything that you're doing, all of the behaviors that you're engaging in, a new gravity. And so my firstborn son, and then all the children we have thereafter, my wife, my family, my dad, those are the cast of characters that have created this influence, which has largely pointed me in the direction that I wanted to go in life, and that has brought me to where I am today.
Yeah, definitely. It's a large cast.
It's a huge cast.
An ever-growing cast.
An ever-growing cast. There's Ashcrofts all over.
They are. They just multiply.
Yeah.
All right. Are you a morning person?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
I couldn't even finish the question. The question was going to be, are you a morning person or a night owl? But I guess no need.
No need. I am definitively, patently a morning person.
Do you want to share what time you wake up in the morning?
Yeah. So that has also been a bit of a moving target. So, and I don't know how much of this we'll get into, but when I started, and this, I promise you, this is all going to tie back to the question. When I started in this career, admittedly, I was a little bit blasé about the whole financial advising thing. And I think part of that is, while I mentioned there's an electromagnetism for sons to follow in the footsteps of their dad, I was committed to doing precisely the opposite for most of my life. So though it was my decision to begin working at Baird, I was one who went through the application process, the whole works, I didn't take the job as seriously as I might have wanted to, or as seriously, certainly not as seriously as Dad would have wanted me to.
And you were young. You were really young.
Still trying to find my way in life. However, when we got pregnant with our first, I decided to commit myself to doing this job. And what that required was I needed to go out and pass a series of exams. So I had my license. I'd done what you're doing now. I didn't have to do the SAA because that's rather new, but I did the 7, the 66, the insurance licensing, all of that. But I wanted to be a certified financial planner. I wanted to be somebody who had the marks of expertise. And I went about it in a little bit of an unusual way. But what that required, because at this time, I had the older 2 kids are from a prior marriage that my wife had, and then we had a child, and then we were shortly thereafter pregnant with our next child. I needed to find time to study. So for 2 years, maybe slightly more than 2 years, I was getting up at 3:45 in the morning. And what that allowed me to do was I could get up at 3:45 in the morning, I could get downstairs, I could get settled into my study, and I could study for 2 solid hours, and I was seldom interrupted between 4 and 6 a.m. Now, with that number of kids, the house starts to kind of wake up at 6. Things started to happen, and I've definitely committed myself to my health. So I had the opportunity to work out from about 6 to 6:30 in the mornings, and we have a setup at home, so that was really nice. But I quickly discovered that all of my best thinking was done between basically 4 a.m. and 6 a.m.
Those of you at home can't see her, but our sound engineer and creative director extraordinaire behind the camera noticeably flinched when you said 3:45.
I would say it was more of a grimace,
I think she thinks you're crazy now.
Well, when I describe people, and people will come to me and they will see what it is that I've done. And there's a lot of trite expressions about everybody wants the view, but nobody wants the hike. But there's those trite expressions or those cliches are trite or cliche for a reason, and that there's definitely some truth embedded in those phrases. People ask me, how did you do what you did? Because between 2020 and 2022, I did my Certified Private Wealth Advisor exam, the CPWA. I did my Certified Investment Management Analyst exam, which is the CIMA. I did my Retirement Management Advisor exam, which is the RMA. And then I launched into getting my master's degree in personal financial planning while concurrently pursuing the Chartered Financial Analyst Level 1 exam, which has a historic pass rate of something like 40%. So I was doing my master's program and the CFA concurrently. And then right after I finished the CFA program, I went ahead and did my CFP and then finished up my master's degree in the spring of 2023. So people ask me how I did all of that, and I tell them exactly what I did. I give them the formula, and they look at me like this. That can't be.
When you start talking about waking up in the 3s, you lose a lot of people.
When there's a 3 on the clock, I think most people then just tune it out.
They do. They say, not for me.
Not for me.
No, thank you.
Nope. I'm fine just being a financial advisor. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, people do often comment that you have almost the entire alphabet behind your name.
That's true. And then a lot of people will assume I did most of what I did when I was single and had a lot of spare time. And then they discover because there was a guy had a CFA and he talked a little bit about it with Dad, and he was saying, yeah, well, he must have done some of that when he was younger and all that. And he goes, nope, he did most of that when he had 4 kids.
And newborns.
So it was a journey. It was an adventure, but I followed that formula and it worked.
Very impressive. All right, let's move on. If you weren't a financial advisor, what career would you have pursued?
This, again, revolving cast of characters of all the various things that you thought you might have been when you were younger. For a long time, I very seriously considered going into the military and doing some military service right out of college. I was talked out of that by family. And then a lot of people growing up made it seem as though I would make a great lawyer because I suppose I was rather argumentative or disagreeable. And I think it drives my wife crazy because I'm very skeptical. I'm very skeptical of things. And basically what that means is extraordinary claims to me require extraordinary evidence. So I very seldom take things as face value. I very seldom believe things are the way that they first appear at first blush. There's a cognitive reflection test that people have administered. It's that 3-question IQ test or supposed IQ test that a lot of people have heard about. It's the bat and the ball and the lily pads it doesn't matter. I scored very highly on that because, again, when you're taking those sorts of exams or it's those sorts of questions, people who do well are not necessarily bright, but they're the people who look at the question and think, this isn't exactly what it seems. So lawyer was something that I had thought that I might do. And then actually since becoming more adept at what I'm doing now, medicine has been very intriguing to me, particularly preventative medicine, and how that is going to become a much larger part, I think, of practicing medicine rather than just addressing illnesses or chronic diseases or ailments as they arise and treating symptoms. I think we are on the cutting edge of figuring out how we can get ahead of some of these things. And that is a very intriguing field to me. So professionally, I feel like now knowing that I have the cognitive ability to kind of sit down with material and learn it, it's certainly opened up the array of options that I felt like could have been afforded to me. So I have no idea which direction I might have gone in the 1,000 possible lives that I could have lived, but those would be the areas that I would be most interested in now.
You're pretty locked in on the current path.
Roots are deep. Roots are deep. When you got 7 kids, family of 9, find what you're good at. And one of my fundamental philosophies of life is repeat what works.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say, going back to the lawyer thing, which I myself have pointed out throughout our lives, that I think you would be a great lawyer. I don't think it's because you're argumentative. I feel like you have a real desire for justice. Like,
yes.
Do you think that's very important to you? Like the right thing happening, and I feel like you've always been a good advocate for people who need it.
Right. Yes. Anytime I felt like there was something going on that was unfair, it definitely resonated with me very deeply.
Even as children, our elementary art teacher, when my mom came to school, cried telling her about how sweet you were to the kids who needed a friend.
That's true. Micah Haynes. He was great. He's a good boy.
Yeah.
Good boy.
Okay, just a couple more, and then we'll wrap up for today. But let's move on to some of the more financial advisor related questions. Some questions about your craft that you've been honing and studying and working on. So what would you say you enjoy most about your job?
Well, I think the people that we work with is generally going to be what we enjoy most about our work. And we have the luxury and the privilege of working with professionals mostly, and people who are very detail oriented, but I think most importantly, because a lot of people might say working with engineers or working with people who are detail oriented, that sounds like a nightmare because they're probably going to be picking every little issue out, and they do that. But the other side of that is when you work with professionals or work with people who have high standards, they typically have a reverence for expertise, and they can recognize a comparative advantage pretty readily.
Yeah.
So the way that we communicate with our clients is, it's not necessarily that you couldn't manage this money on your own, but you have other things that you want to do in your retirement, and I can do this at a far lower opportunity cost than our clients could. And for a lot of people, they get hung up on just the expense. Well, how much is it going to cost me to employ a financial advisor? And admittedly, it's certainly more expensive than doing it yourself. But working with people who recognize, I could probably do this for myself for some time, but that would require me not doing other things that are more valuable for me or more valuable to me and my family. You want to work with people who recognize that. And so we have the great privilege of doing so. So I think that element of my job, or that element of the job that we do, is great, is working with people who understand that you are a professional and who respect your advice. Because there's nothing worse than being a professional and giving people advice and then not take it. So then they get bad results and they're like, well, what's going on here? And I think that the other element of our job, particularly when working with retirees, is I think financial advisor, previously known as stockbroker, has started to sound a little bit like annuity in the financial literature, particularly the financial literature outside of white papers. So books that people might read, which are largely, some exposition on how it is that you can very affordably manage your own money. What I find hilarious about most of those books is they have to start with a disclosure. And the disclosure to a lot of personal financial planning books is, I am not a professional. If you have questions about your finances, seek professional guidance. So I feel like in that respect, we are trying to undo some of the negative resonance that financial advisor might get outside of the spheres in which we work. And by doing that, I think a lot of people view of an advisor as just a middleman between their returns or the returns that they should get and their money. And we are trying to say, well, that's not really what we're here for. And I think that another view people have is, well, financial advisors, they never want you to spend your money. They're just going to be optimizers and they just want you to continue to grow your money and all that. And it's like, nope, that's not true. And I think part of what makes our practice a little bit unique is we're not here to tell you that you need to adopt this ascetic lifestyle or live in penury in order to leave a huge estate. In fact, for most of our clients, because they were so diligent and because they were such great savers and investors in their working life, we are encouraging them to spend more money than they might even feel comfortable spending.
Yeah.
Because we are trying to point out that all of us have an expiration date and that your potential is perishable. So there are all these things that you could be doing with your money, but people think that, no, I want to hang on to it. I never want to invade the principal balance of my retirement savings. I just got to spend the dividends. Saying no. So a lot of our job, and the part that I really enjoy, is showing people you can live a more luxurious lifestyle than you might have thought. And we're here to make sure that you don't go completely off the rails. But really, we're just here to make sure that we can administer the lifestyle safely, effectively, consistently, that you want to live in retirement. And that we're going to offer you some guidance along the way on how to do so tax efficiently, how you might want to structure your estate. All of that stuff comes along with it. But at the end of the day, they made the money and they just need some guidance, in most cases, on how to spend it well.
Definitely. I do think that's very misunderstood in this industry. And I think that, this practice has always taken a really kind of holistic, I know that word's overused, but kind of a comprehensive view of what the money can do for a person's life, what it means, and how they should use it to have the kind of life that they've worked so hard for.
Right. And I think a lot of people, and this is language that I try to dissuade our clients from using, is they discuss their retirement savings as their investment portfolio.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, it's kind of an investment portfolio, but the purpose of the money, unless you really do want to leave it all to your kids or to a charity, and we have a few clients who are very much in that camp, who want to make sure they leave a good portion to philanthropic causes or to their family. The purpose of the money is to turn it into material goods and experiences that you enjoy.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we have to meet some subsistence level of spending year over year. These are going to be what your housing costs are, what your utilities are, often referred to as the HUGS expenses or your core expenses. But that is not generally the concern that people who employ a financial advisor have. Yes, the baseline is we need to manage your assets in a way that prevents you from running out of money, barring some catastrophe. But I think most people are coming to a financial advisor almost to get tacit approval of the life they want to live.
Definitely.
And so what we try to do as a practice is say, you're not in the green room anymore. You're on the stage. You got to dance. You can't just keep thinking that the life you want to live is just around the next bend.
Yeah.
When you have $2, $3, $4, $5 million, all you're doing is building yourself a very expensive prison if you cannot stand to see any money going out of the portfolio. So don't look at it as your investment portfolio. This is your experiences portfolio.
Yeah. I like that. So how do you stay current with the latest trends and changes in the financial world?
I don't mean to be blasé about this because there's definitely regulatory or tax changes that we stay on top of. And the firm also provides us a lot of support in that respect because we have tax planning departments, estate planning departments, insurance planning departments. But beyond that, I try not to wrap myself around the axle of the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
I'm not really that interested in various financial trends. Like I don't own Bitcoin as an example. And I haven't bought the hype on Bitcoin. And admittedly, I could be wrong. But I think most people would be better served if they looked at their financial accounts once a year rather than what most people do now, which is once a day.
And especially for us, because our clients are, for the most part, retired.
Right. So I try to absolve myself from as much noise as possible so that I can be attuned to the signal.
The fundamentals.
And I think that if people say, well, again, it's a cliche, I'm trying to parse out the signal from the noise, but there's an element of truth to that, which is I don't think reading the Wall Street Journal, which can only do one thing, it can only report what has already happened. And I don't have to point this out to people. Everybody knows this, which is you can just look at the various professional economists and their predictions on the direction of interest rates, where the S&P 500 will close in a given year, how a particular stock will perform, and they are almost always disastrously wrong.
Yeah.
And it's not because they're not smart. These are bright people, and they do get it right from time to time, but because it is so difficult. It's so difficult to predict what is going to happen in the world. If you read the January issue of The Economist, which is like the premier gold standard financial publication in the world, not a mention of COVID in 2020. Not a word, not a whisper of it. They never would have guessed that it would have such a profound impact on the markets. And that is what every single year is like. The thing that we are not thinking about is going to have the largest or the most disproportionate impact on your portfolio. And so living with that reality is tricky, but that's why I mostly spend my time, as you said, centering people on the fundamentals, centering people on history, centering people on what has worked previously. And this isn't to be a turkey. This isn't to suggest that that in our practice, we assume that the world is going to look tomorrow exactly as it looks today. Quite the opposite. We try to just absolve our clients of the risks posed by an uncertain world. And that's often a very unsexy portfolio. It's not doing anything interesting. In fact, it's in many cases saying, no, we're not going to do that. It's a lot of the success that our clients have is what they don't do rather than what we proactively do on their.
Yeah. I remember we had a fund manager in here once, and he was talking about some of the financial analysis that's done and how it can often make horoscopes look accurate.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's like, I think trying to predict the movements of the markets makes astrology look like a legitimate endeavor.
Yeah. Or at least more accurate than their predictions.
Yeah.
Obviously not always the case. But...
Not always the case. And people do get it right. I mean, Philip Tetlock wrote a wonderful book about this very issue, where he said there are some super forecasters out there who do have very good predictive ability. And this is probabilistically, though. So it's saying they're right a certain percentage of the time, and that's better than random chance.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they're clairvoyant. And what he pointed out was the super forecasters are not who you'd think they were. And generally speaking, the best way to tell whether or not a person is going to make great forecasts is if they're recognized as a great forecaster by the media, they're probably not very good.
Yeah.
If there's somebody you've never heard of, somebody who just follows a particular issue, like say the conflict in the Middle East very closely and understands that very well, they might be able to give you some decent predictions on how that one very siloed thing in the world will unfold. But what Philip Tetlock points out is most of these predictions are pretty good in about a year's worth of time. But beyond a year, as to say what might happen 2 years from now, even the best forecasters that he identified, no predictive validity whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up with a final question for today, and maybe we'll do a part 2.
Okay.
If the people want it.
Well, we're going to get Scott on here too.
Yeah, well, we'll get to know Scott a little better for sure. But what's the biggest financial mistake you've seen people make, and how can it be avoided?
Okay, I think I will have to, again, go with a revolving cast of characters in this respect, which is, and we touched on this before, in our practice, which is largely retirement-centric, the biggest mistake we see people make is not spending money. Not spending money they could have spent until it's too late to have spent it. And I think when you're young and you're healthy, and this is true for people now who are in their 60s, and for some of our clients into their 70s, you have this perspective that how I'm feeling now is how I'm always going to feel. And the best way for me to describe this is if you're very full, if you've just had a meal, try to put yourself in the shoes of a person who is very hungry. Mm-hmm. You really can't do it. It's almost inconceivable to do that. And so I think, unfortunately, that's the case for some of our retirees, is when they're young and capable and healthy in their 60s, and for some people into their 70s, they can't imagine a world in which they can't do the things that they want to do, or they can't travel, they can't get down on the floor to play with their grandkids, they can't do whatever. And so most of the time, they end up in a situation where they're now in their mid-80s and they're not thrilled by the money. The money is of little value to them. So I think one of the fundamental mistakes people make, particularly when they retire, is they don't spend enough, or they don't do enough on the early part of their retirement. And that's not to say you should go in there with no plan and just spend like crazy. No, you should still do so within the confines of a considerate financial plan. But if your advisor is telling you that you can spend more money and have more experiences, do so.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I think the financial mistakes people make is that they spend money on things that fundamentally don't make them happy. And the things that we spend money on that have been shown to make us happy might not be the things that people think will do so. New cars generally do nothing for people. New houses generally over time do nothing for people. Material goods as a whole generally do nothing for people unless they're incorporated into something that you're doing every day in your life. So there are things, and again, I am not the financial advisor who's like, well, that $5 cup of coffee, if you took that money instead, put it in the S&P 500, 37 years from now, you'd have $500,000. These are not exact numbers. One, to conclude that if a person didn't buy a $5 cup of coffee, that they're like, well, I could buy the coffee or put it in the S&P 500. People don't do that.
No.
It's like if you didn't buy the coffee, they just spent the money on something else.
Absolutely.
And also people don't want to hear that. And what often is not included in the analysis is like, well, yeah, that was 37 years where I was drinking terrible coffee. And it's like, well, great. Now I have the money and years and years and years of just, drinking terrible coffee. So I am definitely not of that opinion, but I am of the opinion of saying, all right, if you're going to spend some money, let's make sure that it's actually meaningful to you.
Yeah.
And some of these are trite, but they're true, which is buy experiences and not things, generally speaking, because you get the memory of the experience associated with the experience, which can pay you essentially a happiness dividend for years and years and years.
Forever.
The other thing is, if you're going to buy an experience, make it a treat. It shouldn't be an obligation. It should be a treat. And one of our favorite quotes growing up was, treat yourself to a little something every day because you never know when a Mack truck will come and take you out. That's true.
True.
It's true.
We live by that.
Yeah. Another element of how people can very purposefully spend their money is to use their money in an effort to buy themselves more time. And so a lot of people will, particularly some of our clients, have this Calvinist mentality that life should be a struggle all the time. If you're not struggling, you're not getting better. So you got people out there in their late 60s who are still mowing their lawn. It's like, okay, well, that's an hour in a day. And if it brings you a lot of joy to mow your own lawn, do it. But if you're miserable doing it, hire somebody to do it. It just doesn't take that much time. It doesn't take that much money. And you buy yourself back an hour to an hour and a half. And you save yourself the misery of having to mow your own lawn.
And potential injury.
There's a lot of things that go into it, but using your money to buy yourself some time it's just going to make you happier. It's just well documented. You want more time. You want more flexibility.
Yeah.
The other of which is, if you're going to have an experience, as much as you can, pay in advance, because now you don't have the pain of payment right at the time that you're supposed to be enjoying yourself.
You told me to do this for my honeymoon.
Exactly. So there's nothing more deflating than, say, a young man takes a woman out on a date and then he gets the bill and immediately starts sweating. So it's like, if you could have prepaid, or if you had a gift card,
ooh,
not the smoothest move.
Nothing wrong with a gift
There's nothing
card.
wrong with it, but
financially, responsible man.
If you're going to treat yourself to something and you can separate the pain of payment from the enjoyment that you're going to have for that experience, do it. Do it.
It's a small tip, but it's a good one.
Because then you're not just caught up in the moment of, oh, wow, everything I get at this restaurant is going to cost me a little bit more money. That robs you needlessly of the joy you're supposed to be feeling while you're doing something fun.
I think people also talk themselves out of going on trips,
for sure,
and things like that.
All the time.
When they get, a month out and they're buying plane tickets and hotel reservations, and they just think, you know what, let's just stay home.
That, or they ultimately go where they want to go. So Disneyland is the one, or Disney World is a classic for, you get people in the park, you can sell them a $14 bottle of water.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you see families who didn't really budget well enough in advance, and now they're trying to pick and choose, and I don't want to do that. Can't get ice cream. Kids are upset. You don't want to find yourself in that situation. And instead, you want to pay in advance as often as you can. And then finally, give some away. Most people would say, well, that's not really a great use of my money because it means somebody else has the money to get an experience. No. Giving money away, either to a charitable cause or blessing other people or giving a gift monetarily with no strings attached, that is actually going to probably boost your happiness more than the receiver of the gift. And so a lot of people can if you employ these 5 basic strategies, and there's actually a wonderful book written on this called Happy Money, and we might actually do a podcast just covering that book, but these are the ways in which we try to counsel people. We try to move them in that direction where they're spending their money, and it's kind of weird because all of a sudden life is going a little bit better and you're not real clear why. But it's just because you're employing the money that you have in a way that's going to make you happier just generally.
Yeah.
And I think that's great.
Yeah.
So financial mistakes people make, long-winded way of saying they spend their money on the wrong things.
Yeah. No, I think that's very wise advice. I said that was the last question, but as we were talking, I thought of one more question.
Let's do it.
So for anyone who's still with us, which is probably just our mom at this point.
Probably.
Yeah, we'll just give them one more.
Love you, Mom.
Yeah, love you, Mom. Okay, so money, utility of money. What is something recently that you've purchased, $100 or less, that has really improved your life? And I'm taking this question from the Tim Ferriss show. I don't know if he still asks this, but he used to ask it. And I've made a lot of purchases based on his guest responses.
$100 or less that has made a material impact on my happiness. Okay. Yeah, this is a good one. Well, it probably isn't less than $100, but...
Pretty close. It's okay. We won't fact check you.
But I always thought that like bouncy houses were...
This is not where I thought this was going to go.
I always thought growing up that bouncy houses were things that the kids of the rich and famous had...
Kardashians.
Like a Kardashian might
Which
have
they do.
at their birthday parties, right? Only to discover as an adult that you can go on Amazon.com and get an inflatable splash pad with a slide and like a climbing wall and the whole works. And it's not $100. It's probably like $300. You can buy those and just have them at your house all the time.
I mean, $300 for something that might pop or...
But this is durable. This is more durable. And it comes with the inflating thing and the whole works. I literally thought that there was a company that had cornered the market on these things and you could only rent them. Like, they didn't sell these things. So my wife and I, we were looking at this. We have a bunch of kids, and it's summertime, and kids need things to do. Being able to inflate that thing, attach the hose, and just let the kids play on it, that, provided that your kids are old enough to enjoy it, has given us hours and hours of essentially free childcare.
Yeah.
So I would say, again, doesn't come in under the $100. And I would say most of the things that I enjoy buying that are less than $100 are just books. And because I buy a lot of books. But books are like $8 on Amazon now. But if I was talking to a parent, they said, whoa, what's an activity that you got a lot of return for? The bouncy splash pad it's tops.
It is fun watching them out there. They're having such a ball.
So much fun.
Such a good time.
Much fun.
Yeah.
And I would say for the cost of an ongoing less than $100 is we've enrolled 2 of our kids in jiu-jitsu. And it is very cute. And it is very fun.
It is cute. It is cute. Well, Greg, thank you for spending the time. That concludes the questions for today. But as we mentioned, maybe we do a part 2 to this if the audience wants to know more about you. But as always, to all of you listening, again, potentially just our mom, we really thank you for your time. You can subscribe to the Baird Retirement Management Show wherever you get your podcasts. This broadcast contains the current opinions of the hosts and are subject to change. The broadcast is provided for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice or recommendations. Investors should obtain professional advice before making investment decisions. This is not a complete analysis of every material fact regarding any company, industry, or security. The information has been obtained from sources we consider to be reliable but cannot guarantee their accuracy. For more information about any companies discussed, please contact Baird. Past performance is not indicative of future results, and diversification does not ensure a profit or protect against loss. All investments carry some level of risk, including loss of principal. An investment cannot be made directly in an index. This broadcast may not be reproduced without express permission of Robert W. Baird & Co., Incorporated.